I'm Natalie, 31, and I never imagined that my sister-in-law would force me to use my own security company against my own family. When Camilla stole my $35,000 non-refundable deposit for Rosewood Manor and transferred my dream wedding venue to her name, I was shattered. But what she didn't realize was that by betraying me, she'd just declared war on someone who owns a private security firm with access to every lock, camera, and alarm system in the city. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moment I discovered what she'd done, sitting in my car outside the venue coordinator's office with tears streaming down my face, I knew this wouldn't end like all the other times she'd taken something from me. This time, I had resources she couldn't even imagine. This time, I had a team of ex-military security specialists who were about to help me reclaim what was rightfully mine in the most spectacular way possible. Before I tell you how I used my security expertise to completely dismantle Camilla's perfect little world, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. I bet some of you have dealt with toxic in-laws too. And if you've ever had someone steal something precious from you and got away with it, smash that like button, because today's story is about making sure that never happens again. Stories like mine prove that sometimes the best revenge comes from using exactly the skills that made you successful in the first place. So if you want to see how a security professional handles family betrayal, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss how this unfolds. Now let me take you back to where this whole nightmare began. In the affluent suburbs of Willowbrook Heights, where I built my life from nothing into something I was genuinely proud of. Growing up in a cramped apartment above my grandmother's bakery in downtown Millfield, I learned early that if you wanted something, you had to work for it. No handouts, no shortcuts, just pure determination and smart planning. After serving 4 years in the Army as a military police officer, I used my GI benefits to study criminal justice and business management. By 25, I had founded Sentinel Security Solutions, starting with just me and a borrowed van, offering basic alarm installations to small businesses. 6 years later, my company employed 47 people and handled security for half the commercial properties in Millfield County, plus personal protection for several high-net-worth families. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd built a career protecting other people's valuable assets, only to have my own family steal from me, but we'll get to that. My personal life had been just as carefully constructed. I met David during a security consultation at the law firm where he worked as a corporate attorney. He was intelligent, grounded, and refreshingly honest, qualities I'd learned to value after dealing with too many clients who thought money could buy them out of any situation. What I loved most about David was that he saw my success as something to celebrate, not something that threatened his masculinity like so many other men I dated. When David proposed after 2 years together with a vintage emerald ring that had belonged to his grandmother, I felt like all my hard work and careful planning had finally paid off. We weren't just building a marriage. We were creating a partnership between two people who understood the value of dedication and integrity. That's when I should have remembered that David came with family attachments I hadn't fully considered, specifically his sister Camilla. Camilla was everything I wasn't. Impulsive where I was methodical, entitled where I was grateful, manipulative where I was direct. At 28, she'd never held a job for more than 8 months, and had a talent for finding wealthy men to fund her lifestyle between her various career pivots and creative pursuits. David's parents, wealthy real estate developers who'd always bailed out their daughter, saw her constant drama as endearing rather than exhausting. When David and I announced our engagement, Camilla's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of congratulations, her first question was about the budget. "How much are you planning to spend?" she asked with that calculating look I'd learned to recognize. "I hope you're not going overboard. Weddings are such a waste of money for people our age." Coming from someone who'd never earned $1 of her own money, the comment stung. But David squeezed my hand under the table and changed the subject, and I let it slide. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was sharing my excitement about finding Rosewood Manor, a historic estate in the heart of Willowbrook Heights that had been converted into an exclusive wedding venue. The property was stunning, a 19th-century mansion with manicured gardens, a ballroom with crystal chandeliers, and grounds that looked like something from a fairy tale. They only hosted 20 weddings per year, and getting a date required booking at least 18 months in advance. When the venue coordinator, Patricia, called to tell me they'd had a cancellation for my preferred date in September, I knew it was meant to be. The deposit was substantial, minus $35,000 that represented months of careful saving, but for my dream venue on my perfect date, it was worth every penny. I'll never forget the moment I handed over that cashier's check, watching Patricia smile as she assured me I'd made an excellent choice. "September weddings here are absolutely magical," she said, filing my contract in her leather portfolio. "The gardens will be at their peak, and the lighting in the ballroom during sunset is simply breathtaking." I drove straight to David's family dinner that night, practically glowing with excitement as I shared the news with everyone gathered around their massive dining room table. Even Camilla seemed genuinely happy for us, asking to see photos of the venue and commenting on how perfect it would be for our style of celebration. "Fall weddings are so elegant," she said, scrolling through the venue's website on her phone. "Much more sophisticated than those basic spring ceremonies everyone else does." I should have noticed how intently she studied every detail, how she screenshotted the venue information, how she asked pointed questions about the booking process. Instead, I was just grateful that for once, David's family seemed united in celebrating something positive. If I had known that within 6 weeks, Camilla would use that very information to steal everything I'd worked so hard to secure, I would have kept my mouth shut and planned my wedding in secret. But hindsight is 20/20, and trust, once broken, reveals exactly who people really are underneath their carefully constructed facades. What Camilla didn't know was that her betrayal would awaken a side of me she'd never seen before. The side that had built a security empire from nothing, the side that understood how to protect assets and neutralize threats, the side that had access to every building in the city and the skills to use that access strategically. She thought she was stealing from a naive bride-to-be. Instead, she'd just picked a fight with someone who made a living staying 3 steps ahead of people exactly like her. To understand how Camilla could betray me so completely, you need to understand the family dynamics that shaped her into the person she became. The Hartwell family wasn't just wealthy, they were old money, the kind of people whose great-grandfather had owned half the textile mills in Millfield County before selling them off to become real estate moguls. David's parents, Jonathan and Priscilla Hartwell, lived in a sprawling colonial mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood of Willowbrook Heights. Jonathan ran Hartwell Development Group, which had transformed downtown Millfield from a declining industrial area into a thriving business district. Priscilla served on the boards of 3 different charities and chaired the annual Willowbrook Heights Garden Club Gala. On the surface, they appeared to be the perfect family, successful, philanthropic, well-respected in all the right social circles. But behind the polished facade, a much more toxic dynamic was at play, one that had been brewing for decades. From the moment I met them, it was clear that David and Camilla had been raised with completely different sets of rules. David, the older child by 3 years, had been held to rigorous standards from birth. Academic excellence wasn't optional. It was expected. When he struggled with math in 7th grade, he was immediately enrolled in an expensive tutoring program. When he expressed interest in art during high school, he was steered toward more practical pursuits that would serve him well in business or law. "David has always been our responsible one," Priscilla would say with pride whenever she introduced him to their social circle. Even as a child, he understood the importance of making good choices and thinking about the future. Camilla, on the other hand, had been treated like a delicate flower that needed constant protection from life's harsh realities. When she failed her sophomore year of college, it wasn't her fault. The professors had been unreasonably demanding. When she totaled her BMW while texting and driving, it wasn't irresponsible behavior. It was just an accident that could happen to anyone. The enabling reached absurd levels. I once watched Jonathan write a $15,000 check to cover Camilla's credit card debt, without even asking what she'd spent the money on. When she quit her job at an art gallery after 2 months because her manager was too controlling, Priscilla immediately began making phone calls to find her something more suitable. Camilla is just very sensitive, Priscilla would explain whenever anyone questioned this pattern. She needs time to find herself and discover her passion. Not everyone can be as driven as David. What they called sensitivity, I recognized as manipulation. Camilla had learned early that tears and dramatic emotional displays would get her whatever she wanted, while David had learned that his value was tied to his achievements and his ability to solve problems for everyone else. This dynamic became painfully obvious during my first Christmas with the family. David had surprised me with a weekend trip to Vermont, something thoughtful and romantic that he'd planned weeks in advance. When we returned and shared photos with his family, Camilla immediately complained that she felt left out and wished someone would plan special trips for her too. Within 48 hours, Jonathan had booked her a week-long spa retreat in Napa Valley, complete with first-class flights and accommodations at a resort that cost more than most people's monthly salary. When I gently pointed out to David that the timing seemed suspiciously coincidental, he just shrugged. "That's just how they are with her," he said, as if this level of emotional manipulation was perfectly normal. "It's easier to just go along with it than to create drama." But I was starting to see that the drama wasn't something that happened to Camilla. It was something she manufactured whenever she felt like someone else was getting attention she thought belonged to her. The pattern repeated itself constantly. When David got a promotion at his law firm, Camilla suddenly decided she wanted to go back to school and needed her parents to pay for a master's degree in art therapy. When I bought my first house, a modest 3-bedroom colonial that represented years of saving and careful financial planning, Camilla announced that she'd found the perfect downtown loft that just happened to cost twice as much as my place. "Real estate is such a good investment," Jonathan would say, signing yet another check. "We're just helping Camilla build wealth for her future." What struck me most was how David had internalized this double standard. He never asked his parents for anything, even when his law school loans were crushing him financially, or when his car needed major repairs he couldn't afford. He'd been trained from childhood to be the giver, the solver, the one who made everything easier for everyone else. Meanwhile, Camilla had been trained to be the taker, the one whose needs always came first, whose feelings were always the most important consideration in any family decision. I tried to stay out of it, focusing on building my relationship with David while maintaining polite distance from his family's dysfunction. My own upbringing had been the complete opposite. My grandmother had taught me that respect was earned, not given, and that taking responsibility for your choices was the foundation of good character. "You can't control what other people do," Grandma Rose used to tell me while we worked side by side in her bakery, "but you can control how you respond to it. Always take the high road, but never let anyone mistake kindness for weakness." Those words had guided me through military service, through building my business, and through navigating the complex social dynamics of David's family. I thought I was successfully walking that line between kindness and self-protection. But I was about to learn that in families like the Hartwells, kindness wasn't seen as strength, it was seen as vulnerability. And Camilla had been watching me much more carefully than I realized, studying my reactions, cataloging my weaknesses, waiting for the perfect opportunity to remind me that in her world she would always be the priority. The most telling moment came during David's birthday dinner 6 months before our engagement. I'd spent weeks planning a surprise party for him, coordinating with his friends, booking his favorite restaurant, and arranging for a custom cake from a high-end bakery. It was important to me to show him how much I valued him, especially since I knew his family rarely celebrated his achievements the way they celebrated Camilla's every whim. The party was perfect. David was genuinely surprised and touched. His friends had a wonderful time, and even his parents seemed to appreciate the effort I'd put into making the evening special for their son. But halfway through dinner, Camilla started crying. Not quiet tears. Dramatic, shoulder-shaking sobs that immediately drew everyone's attention away from David's celebration. When Priscilla rushed to her side to ask what was wrong, Camilla choked out that she was feeling overwhelmed by everyone else's happiness because she was going through such a difficult time. Within minutes, David's birthday party had become a therapy session for Camilla's latest emotional crisis. The conversation shifted entirely to her problems, her feelings, her needs. David spent the rest of his own birthday dinner comforting his sister instead of celebrating with his friends. And the most infuriating part? Everyone acted like this was normal. Like it was perfectly reasonable for Camilla to hijack her brother's special moment because she needed attention. That night, I realized I wasn't just dating David. I was entering a family system where Camilla's emotional needs would always take precedence over everyone else's happiness. Where her feelings mattered more than anyone else's boundaries. Where her wants would always be treated as emergencies that required immediate family intervention. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could build a strong enough relationship with David that we could create our own healthy dynamic separate from his family's dysfunction. I had no idea that Camilla was already planning to teach me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy, and that my wedding would become the battlefield where she'd make that lesson crystal clear. The first time Camilla directly targeted me was so subtle that I almost missed it entirely. It happened 3 months after David and I started dating, during what should have been a casual family barbecue at the Hartwell estate. I had mentioned to David earlier that week about landing my biggest contract yet, a comprehensive security overhaul for Millfield General Hospital, worth $340,000 and representing months of competitive bidding and presentations. David was proud of my achievement and naturally brought it up during dinner, explaining to his parents how I'd beaten out 3 larger, more established security firms to win the contract. I was grateful for his support, especially since I knew his parents still weren't entirely sure what to make of their son dating someone who worked in what they considered a blue-collar industry. "That's quite impressive, Natalie," Jonathan had said, genuine interest in his voice. "Hospital security is incredibly complex. The liability issues alone must be staggering." I was in the middle of explaining the challenges of balancing public access with patient privacy when Camilla suddenly gasped and clutched her chest dramatically. "Oh my God," she announced breathlessly, "I just remembered. I was supposed to call back that volunteer coordinator at Millfield General today. They want me to organize their next charity art auction, and I completely forgot because I've been so stressed about my gallery interview tomorrow." Just like that, the conversation pivoted entirely away from my professional achievement to Camilla's volunteer work and her latest career pivot. The rest of the evening was spent discussing her potential job at an upscale gallery in downtown Willowbrook Heights, a position that Jonathan's connections had helped her secure an interview for. At the time, I convinced myself it was just unfortunate timing. But looking back, I recognize it as the opening move in a carefully orchestrated campaign to undermine my place in the family. The pattern escalated over the following months, each incident slightly more aggressive than the last. When David invited me to his firm's annual holiday party, a black tie event where I'd meet his professional colleagues for the first time, Camilla called him the morning of the party in tears, claiming she'd locked herself out of her apartment and desperately needed him to drive across town to help her. The emergency turned out to be that she'd forgotten her keys at her friend's house and was too embarrassed to call and ask for them back. David predictably spent 2 hours dealing with Camilla's crisis while I attended his firm's party alone, making awkward small talk with his colleagues who kept asking where he was. By the time he arrived, the dinner portion was over, and I'd had to endure an entire evening of questions about my absent boyfriend. "I'm so sorry," he apologized later, "but you know how Camilla gets when she's stressed. She really needed help, and I couldn't just leave her stranded." When I pointed out that she had other friends she could have called, or that she could have used her phone to contact the friend who had her keys, David just shrugged. "You're right, but she called me, and I couldn't say no. That's just how my family works." That phrase, "that's just how my family works," became David's standard response whenever I questioned Camilla's behavior. It was as if he'd been programmed to accept her manipulation as a natural force, like weather or gravity, rather than a choice she made repeatedly. The incidents grew bolder. When I organized a surprise dinner for David's promotion to senior associate, inviting his closest friends to celebrate at an upscale restaurant I'd booked weeks in advance, Camilla showed up uninvited with her latest boyfriend, Trevor, in tow. "I hope you don't mind," she said with false sweetness, but Trevor really wanted to meet David, and when I mentioned the dinner, he insisted on coming along to congratulate him. The reservation was for 6 people. With Camilla and Trevor, we were now 8, which meant the intimate celebration I'd planned became a cramped, awkward affair with mismatched seating and rushed service. Worse, Camilla spent the entire evening monopolizing the conversation, regaling everyone with stories about Trevor's supposedly impressive career in finance and their plans for a romantic getaway to the Hamptons. When the check arrived, she made a show of reaching for her purse before suddenly remembering that she'd left her wallet in her other bag. Trevor, conveniently, had, quote, only brought enough cash for drinks. David, without hesitation, covered their meals, turning what should have been his celebration into an expensive obligation. "She's just excited about her new relationship," he explained later when I expressed frustration. "You remember how that feels, right? When everything is new and you want to share it with everyone?" But I recognized the pattern now. Every milestone in my relationship with David became an opportunity for Camilla to create drama, demand attention, or establish her priority in his life. When I bought my house, she suddenly needed David's help apartment hunting. When I planned romantic weekends away, she developed urgent crises that required his immediate intervention. The most telling incident happened during my 30th birthday celebration. I had specifically requested a small, quiet dinner, just David and me at our favorite restaurant, followed by drinks with a few close friends. I'd been working 18-hour days on a major contract and was looking forward to a low-key evening focused on relaxation and connection. David had made reservations at Bellecourt, an intimate Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date, and I was genuinely excited for a peaceful evening together. We'd barely ordered appetizers when his phone started buzzing with text messages. "It's Camilla," he said, frowning at his screen. "She says it's urgent." The urgent matter was that she'd had a fight with her friend Madison about plans for the following weekend and needed David to come over immediately to help her process her feelings because she was having a panic attack and couldn't be alone. "It's my birthday," I said quietly, watching as David's attention split between me and his phone, which continued buzzing with increasingly frantic messages. "I know, and I'm so sorry, but she sounds really upset. What if something is actually wrong? What if she hurts herself?" That was Camilla's most effective manipulation tactic, the implied threat of self-harm whenever she didn't get immediate attention. David had been conditioned over years to respond to these emergencies without question, treating every one of her emotional outbursts as a potential crisis. I spent my 30th birthday eating dinner alone while David drove across town to comfort his sister through what turned out to be a minor disagreement about restaurant choices for a girls' night out. By the time he returned, our friends had gone home, and the evening I'd looked forward to for weeks was completely ruined. "She just needed someone to listen," David explained, seemingly oblivious to the significance of abandoning me on my birthday. "You understand, right? Family comes first." That phrase hit me like a physical blow. Family comes first. But somehow, I was never considered family, no matter how serious our relationship became. I was always the outsider whose needs could be postponed, whose feelings could be sacrificed for Camilla's latest drama. The final escalation happened 6 months before our engagement, during David's law school friend Marcus's wedding in Newport. It was supposed to be a romantic weekend getaway. We'd booked a beautiful bed and breakfast, and I was looking forward to attending a wedding together, imagining our own future celebration. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, Camilla announced that she'd broken up with Trevor and was too devastated to be alone that weekend. Before I knew what was happening, she'd invited herself to join us, booking herself into our romantic bed and breakfast and transforming what should have been a couple's retreat into a therapy session for her latest relationship drama. The weekend was a disaster. Camilla monopolized every conversation, made passive-aggressive comments about how lucky I was to have found someone as loyal as David, and created awkward moments throughout the wedding by introducing herself as David's sister who was going through a difficult time and needed extra support from family. During the reception, while I was in the restroom, she cornered two of David's law school friends and told them she was worried about me because I seemed controlling and was trying to isolate David from his family. When I returned to our table, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably, and I could feel the subtle judgment in their glances. That night, alone in our bed and breakfast room, while David walked Camilla through her emotional processing in the lobby, I finally understood what I was really dealing with. This wasn't just typical sister-in-law tension or adjustment difficulties. As David and I got more serious, Camilla was systematically working to undermine my relationship with David, testing his loyalty at every opportunity and training him to choose her needs over mine. She was establishing her dominance in the family hierarchy while positioning me as the outsider who didn't understand how their family worked. More troubling, she was becoming increasingly bold in her attacks, moving from subtle interruptions to outright sabotage. Each incident taught her more about David's boundaries, or lack thereof, and showed her exactly how much she could get away with. What she didn't realize was that her pattern of escalation was also teaching me something valuable. I was learning to recognize manipulation tactics, to document incidents, and to see the bigger picture of what she was really doing. As someone who'd built a career on threat assessment and security planning, I was beginning to understand that Camilla wasn't just an annoying in-law with boundary issues. She was an active threat to my relationship and my future happiness, and she was only getting started. The wedding venue theft would be her masterpiece, the culmination of 2 years of testing, pushing, and establishing her power over David's loyalties. But this time, she'd picked a fight with someone who had the resources and expertise to fight back in ways she couldn't even imagine. Despite Camilla's increasingly aggressive attempts to destabilize my relationship with David, my professional life was flourishing beyond anything I'd imagined when I first started Sentinel Security Solutions. By the time David and I got engaged, my company had evolved from a small operation into one of the most respected security firms in the Tri-County area. The breakthrough came when I landed a contract with Meridian Financial Group, the largest investment firm in Millfield County. Their CEO, Harrison Blake, had specifically requested a female-owned security company after a series of corporate espionage incidents had left him distrustful of the old boys network that dominated the industry. My military background and my company's spotless track record of discretion made us the perfect fit. "What impressed me most about your proposal," Harrison told me during our final contract meeting, "wasn't just the technical expertise, though that was exceptional. It was your understanding that security isn't just about cameras and alarms. It's about anticipating human behavior and staying 3 steps ahead of people who think they're smarter than the system." That contract opened doors I'd never expected. Suddenly, I was getting calls from high-net-worth families who needed personal security assessments, from tech companies requiring cybersecurity consulting, and from government contractors looking for someone who could handle classified facility protection. My team had grown to include former Secret Service agents, cybersecurity specialists, and investigative professionals who brought decades of combined experience to every project. More importantly, I was earning respect in circles where women in security were still rare. I'd been invited to speak at 3 industry conferences, had been featured in Security Today magazine, and was being courted by investors who wanted to help me expand nationally. My annual revenue had crossed the $2 million mark, and I was in discussions with a private equity firm about a potential acquisition that would make me financially independent for life. David was not only supportive of my success, he was genuinely proud of what I'd built. Unlike some of the men I dated who felt threatened by a woman who earned more than they did, David celebrated every contract I won, every industry recognition I received, and every milestone my company achieved. "You're watching a woman build an empire," he would tell his friends with obvious admiration. "Natalie doesn't just run a business. She's revolutionizing an entire industry." That support meant everything to me, especially coming from someone whose own career was demanding and prestigious. David had made partner at Whitmore Kensington and Associates, one of the most respected law firms in the state, specializing in corporate mergers and acquisitions. He regularly worked with Fortune 500 companies and had developed a reputation for handling complex negotiations that other attorneys couldn't manage. We were both at the peak of our professional achievements, both building something meaningful and lasting. Our relationship had deepened into the kind of partnership where we challenged each other intellectually, supported each other's ambitions, and genuinely enjoyed each other's company even after long, stressful days. That's why David's proposal was so perfect. He didn't choose some grand public gesture or elaborate surprise that would have felt performative. Instead, he proposed on a quiet Sunday morning in my kitchen, while we were reading the newspaper and drinking coffee, the kind of peaceful domestic moment that had become precious to both of us despite our hectic schedules. "I love this," he said suddenly, looking up from the business section. "The article about municipal bonds?" I asked, confused. "No," he laughed. "This. Us. The way we fit together. The way you make everything in my life better just by being yourself." He pulled out his grandmother's emerald ring right there at my kitchen table, with morning sunlight streaming through the windows and my security system's status panel blinking green in the background. A perfect metaphor for the safe, secure life we were building together. "Natalie Sarah Chen," he said, using my middle name the way he did when he was being especially tender, "will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life being proud of you?" I said yes before he'd even finished the question, and for the first time in my adult life I felt like I'd found someone who truly understood who I was and what I'd worked to become. The engagement announcement in the Willowbrook Heights Gazette mentioned both of our professional achievements alongside the typical social details. The photo showed us at my company's holiday party, both of us in formal attire, with the caption noting that the bride-to-be was the founder and CEO of Sentinel Security Solutions, and the groom was a partner at Whitmore Kensington and Associates. It was exactly the kind of recognition I'd hoped for, acknowledgement that we were both successful professionals building something meaningful together. The response from the business community was overwhelmingly positive. I received congratulations from clients, competitors, and industry colleagues who knew both of our reputations. But the reaction from David's family was more complicated. Jonathan and Priscilla were polite in their congratulations, though I could sense their discomfort with the public emphasis on my business success. They were accustomed to being the wealthy, powerful family in any social dynamic, and the idea that their future daughter-in-law might be more financially successful than their son clearly unsettled them. "It's wonderful that Natalie has built such a successful little company," Priscilla said during our engagement dinner, the word little delivered with just enough emphasis to sting. "Though I'm sure once you start having children, you'll want to focus more on family life." The assumption that I would naturally scale back my career for motherhood, without any discussion of David making similar sacrifices, revealed everything about their expectations for traditional gender roles, despite their surface-level acceptance of my professional achievements. But it was Camilla's reaction that should have warned me about what was coming. She was unusually quiet during the engagement announcement, offering only perfunctory congratulations before changing the subject to her latest dating adventures. Over the following weeks, she made several comments that seemed designed to undermine the significance of our engagement. "It's so practical that you're marrying someone in your professional network," she said during one family dinner. "Much easier than trying to balance a real romantic relationship with career ambitions." When I mentioned that David and I were looking forward to planning our wedding together, she laughed dismissively. "David's never been the type to care about wedding details. You'll probably end up doing most of the planning yourself, while he focuses on work." These comments were subtle enough that David didn't notice them, but I recognized them as attempts to plant seeds of doubt about our relationship dynamics and my expectations for our future together. More concerning was the way Camilla began inserting herself into conversations about our wedding plans. When David mentioned that we were considering a fall ceremony, she immediately started sharing unsolicited opinions about seasonal wedding themes. When I mentioned that we wanted something elegant but intimate, she began describing elaborate weddings she'd attended and questioning whether we were thinking big enough for a couple of our professional standing. "You only get married once," she said repeatedly. "You should make sure it's truly special and memorable." At the time, I interpreted her interest as typical family involvement in wedding planning, perhaps even a sign that she was finally warming up to me. I had no idea that she was actually conducting reconnaissance, gathering information about our preferences and priorities that she would later use against us. The most significant development during this period was David's growing recognition of his family's dysfunction, particularly regarding Camilla's behavior. My success and the respect I'd earned in my industry seemed to give him a new perspective on the way his family operated. "I never realized how much I'd normalized Camilla's drama," he admitted one evening, after his sister had attempted to hijack another one of our conversations with a manufactured crisis. "Watching how you handle stress and conflict in your business makes me see how manipulative she really is." For the first time since I'd known him, David began setting boundaries with Camilla. When she called during our dinner dates with urgent emergencies, he started letting the calls go to voicemail. When she tried to monopolize family gatherings with her problems, he began redirecting conversations back to other topics. "I want our marriage to be different," he told me. "I want us to be a team that supports each other, not a relationship where one person's family gets to call all the shots." This shift in David's awareness felt like a major victory. After years of feeling like the outsider in his family dynamic, I finally felt like I had a true partner who was committed to building something healthy and independent with me. What I didn't understand was that Camilla noticed this change too, and it terrified her. For the first time in her life, her manipulation tactics weren't working on David. Her emotional emergencies were being met with boundary setting instead of immediate rescue missions. Her attempts to create drama were being recognized and deflected instead of accommodated. She was losing control over the person who had always been her most reliable source of attention and support, and she was watching him build a life with someone who represented everything she wasn't: independent, successful, and genuinely worthy of his respect and admiration. That's when she began planning her most devastating attack yet, one that would target not just my relationship with David but the most precious dream we were building together. 3 months after our engagement, Camilla met Bryce Thornton at a charity polo match in the Hamptons, and I should have known immediately that he was too good to be true. Bryce was everything that typically attracted Camilla: devastatingly handsome, impeccably dressed, and seemingly wealthy enough to fund her expensive lifestyle without question. But there was something different about this one, something that set off my professional instincts from the moment she brought him to Sunday dinner at the Hartwell estate. "Everyone, I want you to meet Bryce," Camilla announced breathlessly, practically glowing as she guided him into the dining room where the family had gathered for Priscilla's famous roast beef dinner. "He's just moved back to Connecticut from London, where he was managing international acquisitions for his family's investment firm." Bryce was tall and lean with the kind of effortless sophistication that came from expensive schools and European summers. His handshake was firm, his smile was charming, and he knew exactly what to say to make Jonathan and Priscilla feel important and impressed. Within minutes, he was discussing market trends with Jonathan and complimenting Priscilla on her art collection, with the kind of detailed knowledge that suggested genuine expertise. "The Monet reproduction in your foyer is exceptional," he told Priscilla over cocktails. "The brushwork is so precise it could fool most casual observers. You have an excellent eye for quality pieces." But something about his performance felt too polished, too perfectly calibrated to appeal to each family member's specific interests and vanities. As someone who made a living reading people and assessing potential threats, I found myself studying Bryce's micro-expressions and noticing small inconsistencies in his story. When Jonathan asked about his family's investment firm, Bryce's answers were oddly vague for someone who supposedly held a senior management position. He mentioned diversified holdings and international markets, without providing specific details about the company's focus or his role in their operations. When Priscilla inquired about his family's estate in Connecticut, he deflected smoothly but never actually answered the question. Most telling was the way he looked at Camilla when he thought no one was watching. Instead of the besotted affection you'd expect from someone in a new relationship, his gaze was calculating, appraising, almost clinical in its assessment of her reactions to his performance. "What do you think of Bryce?" David asked as we drove home that evening. "I think he's exactly what Camilla ordered from Central Casting," I replied carefully. "Handsome, wealthy, sophisticated, and completely focused on making the right impression on your parents." David glanced at me with surprise. "You don't like him?" "It's not about liking him. Something feels off about his story. The way he talks about his business is too general, too rehearsed. And did you notice he never actually answered your mother's question about where his family lives?" "Maybe he's just private about personal details," David suggested, though I could hear doubt creeping into his voice. Some wealthy families are careful about sharing too much information with people they've just met. That was certainly possible, but my instincts told me something different. In my line of work, I'd encountered enough people trying to present false identities to recognize the signs. The carefully crafted backstory that sounded impressive but lacked specific details, the way he steered conversations away from topics that might require concrete knowledge, the slightly too perfect responses that suggested extensive preparation. Over the following weeks, Camilla's relationship with Bryce progressed at lightning speed, following the same pattern I'd observed with her previous boyfriends, but with an intensity that seemed almost manic. She was calling him her soulmate within 2 weeks of meeting him, and posting constant social media updates about their romantic dinners, weekend getaways, and shopping expeditions to high-end boutiques in Manhattan. "Bryce is so generous," she gushed during our next family dinner, showing off a diamond tennis bracelet that had appeared on her wrist. "He insisted on buying this for me when we were at Tiffany's yesterday. He said every woman deserves to feel cherished and appreciated." The bracelet was beautiful and clearly expensive, but something about the gesture felt performative rather than romantic. Most men in new relationships don't make such extravagant purchases unless they're trying to establish their financial credentials or create a specific impression about their resources. More concerning was how quickly Bryce began inserting himself into family events and conversations. He seemed to have an opinion about everything and a story to match every topic that arose. When Jonathan mentioned a challenging commercial real estate deal, Bryce had supposedly handled something similar in London. When Priscilla talked about redecorating her sitting room, Bryce had connections with exclusive interior designers who worked with European royalty. It's fascinating how he always has exactly the right experience to contribute to every conversation, I mentioned to David after a particularly elaborate dinner, where Bryce had dominated the discussion with stories about his supposed connections to various business and social circles. "He's well-traveled and successful," David replied, though he sounded less convinced than he had initially. "I suppose that comes with broad experience in different areas. But I was noticing other things that troubled me. Bryce's phone was constantly buzzing with calls and messages that he would excuse himself to handle privately. He was always vague about his schedule, claiming business obligations that prevented him from making firm plans more than a day or two in advance. And despite his claims about family wealth and business success, he never seemed to have business cards, never mentioned specific colleagues or clients, and consistently deflected questions about the details of his work. Most significantly, I began noticing how he studied our family dynamics with the same calculating attention I'd observed during our first meeting. He seemed particularly interested in the financial arrangements within the family, asking subtle questions about Jonathan's business, showing excessive interest in Priscilla's art collection and jewelry, and making comments that suggested he was assessing the family's overall wealth and spending patterns. "Your parents are remarkably generous with Camilla," he observed to David during one family gathering, watching as Jonathan handed his daughter yet another check to cover her latest shopping spree. "It's wonderful to see a family that prioritizes supporting each other's happiness." The comment felt like fishing for information about family financial dynamics, but David didn't seem to recognize it as such. To him, it probably sounded like Bryce appreciating the family's closeness and generosity. But to me, it sounded like someone conducting a reconnaissance mission. The most alarming development came 6 weeks after Camilla and Bryce started dating, during what should have been a casual family barbecue. Camilla had been unusually quiet throughout the afternoon, which was completely out of character for someone who typically dominated every family gathering with her latest drama or achievement. Then, just as we were finishing dessert, she stood up with a radiant smile and held out her left hand, where a massive emerald-cut diamond ring sparkled in the evening light. "We have an announcement," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "Bryce proposed last night, and I said yes." The family erupted in surprised congratulations, but I felt a chill run down my spine. 6 weeks. They'd known each other for 6 weeks, and now they were engaged. Even by Camilla's impulsive standards, this timeline was reckless. "It was the most romantic thing," Camilla continued, practically bouncing with excitement. "Bryce said he knew from the moment he met me that I was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. He said there was no point in waiting when you found your perfect match." Bryce accepted the family's congratulations with the same polished charm he'd displayed since his first dinner with us, but I noticed he avoided making direct eye contact with me throughout the celebration. When Jonathan asked about their wedding plans, Bryce's answers were as vague as everything else about him. They were thinking about a summer ceremony, something elegant but not too large, perhaps somewhere with significance to both their families. "We want something special," Camilla added, "something that really reflects who we are as a couple and what we mean to each other." As the evening wound down and family members began making their goodbyes, I found myself alone with Bryce for a brief moment in the kitchen while Camilla was saying goodbye to her parents. "Congratulations on your engagement," I said, studying his reaction carefully. "It's quite a whirlwind romance." His smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there during his charming dinner conversation with the family. "When you know, you know," he replied smoothly. "I'm sure you understand. Being engaged yourself, sometimes the heart makes decisions faster than the mind can keep up." "Absolutely," I agreed. Though in my experience, the most important decisions benefit from careful consideration and thorough understanding of what you're committing to. For just a moment his mask slipped, and I saw something calculating and cold in his expression before the charming smile returned. "Of course," he said. "Fortunately, Camilla and I are both committed to building something beautiful together." As I drove home that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that Camilla's engagement was going to create complications I couldn't yet fully anticipate. The timeline was suspicious, Bryce's background didn't add up, and the way he'd looked at me in the kitchen suggested he saw me as a potential threat to whatever game he was playing. What I didn't realize was that Camilla had chosen Bryce specifically because she needed someone who could help her execute the most devastating betrayal she'd ever planned against me. And Bryce, whatever his real motives were, was about to prove himself very useful in helping her steal the one thing that mattered most to David and me: our perfect wedding day. Finding Rosewood Manor felt like discovering a hidden treasure that had been waiting specifically for David and me. After touring 8 different venues across 3 counties and feeling disappointed by each one's limitations, too small, too modern, too impersonal, too expensive. I had almost given up on finding the perfect location for our September wedding. Then Patricia Whitmore, the venue coordinator at Rosewood Manor, returned my call on a rainy Thursday afternoon in March with news that seemed too good to be true. They'd had an unexpected cancellation for September 15th, exactly the date David and I had dreamed of, and she wanted to know if we could come for a private tour that very weekend. "I have to warn you," Patricia said over the phone, her voice warm but professional. "Rosewood Manor isn't just any wedding venue. We're quite selective about the events we host, and we only accept 20 weddings per year. The couple who canceled had booked this date 3 years ago, so this kind of opening almost never happens." David and I drove out to Willowbrook Heights that Saturday morning, following Patricia's detailed directions through winding country roads lined with stone walls and ancient oak trees. When we finally turned through the wrought iron gates marked with a discreet brass plaque reading Rosewood Manor Private Estate, I felt my breath catch in my throat. The manor itself was a masterpiece of 19th century architecture, a 3-story stone mansion with ivy-covered walls, mullioned windows, and a grand entrance flanked by marble columns. But it was the grounds that truly took my breath away. 30 acres of meticulously maintained gardens, including a rose garden with over 200 varieties, a reflecting pool surrounded by weeping willows, and terraced lawns that rolled down toward a small lake where swans glided peacefully across the water. The estate has been in the Rosewood family for over 150 years, Patricia explained as she led us through the gardens toward the main house. They converted it to an exclusive wedding venue 15 years ago as a way to share the beauty of the property while maintaining its historical integrity. Inside, the manor was even more spectacular. The grand ballroom featured 20-foot ceilings, crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow patterns across the polished marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the gardens. Adjacent to the ballroom was an elegant library with mahogany paneling and a massive stone fireplace, perfect for cocktail hour or intimate gathering spaces. "The bridal suite is on the 2nd floor," Patricia continued, guiding us up a sweeping staircase with hand-carved banisters. "It has been completely renovated with modern amenities while preserving the original Victorian details. The bridal suite was like something from a fairy tale. A spacious room with a 4-poster bed draped in white silk, an antique vanity with a 3-way mirror perfect for wedding preparations, and French doors that opened onto a private balcony overlooking the rose garden." "This is it," I whispered to David, squeezing his hand as we stood together on the balcony, looking out over the grounds where our wedding guests would soon gather. "This is absolutely perfect." David nodded, his arm tightening around my waist. "I can see you walking down the aisle in the rose garden," he said softly, "and dancing in that ballroom under those chandeliers. It's like this place was designed specifically for us." Patricia smiled as she watched our reaction. "I thought you might feel that connection. Rosewood Manor has a way of choosing its couples as much as couples choose it. The estate has hosted some of the most memorable weddings in New England history." As we toured the rest of the facilities, the professional catering kitchen, the spacious quarters for wedding vendors, the elegant guest cottages for out-of-town family members, I felt a growing sense of excitement and rightness about this venue. Everything about Rosewood Manor aligned with the vision David and I had discussed for our wedding. Elegant but not ostentatious, romantic but not overly sentimental, sophisticated but still warm and welcoming. "I need to be honest with you about our requirements," Patricia said as we concluded the tour in her office, a cozy room lined with photo albums documenting decades of beautiful weddings. Rosewood Manor is expensive. The venue fee alone is $35,000, which covers exclusive use of the grounds for the entire weekend, including the rehearsal dinner and post-wedding brunch. That fee is non-refundable once the contract is signed, and we require full payment within 48 hours of reservation. The price was substantial, representing nearly a year of savings for my personal account, but as I looked through the photo albums showing breathtaking ceremonies in the rose garden and elegant receptions in the ballroom, I knew this was worth every penny. The September 15th date won't be available long, Patricia continued. I already have 3 other couples who've inquired about it since this morning. If you want to secure this date, I need your decision and deposit by Monday afternoon. David and I spent the drive home discussing the financial commitment and our priorities for the wedding. We could afford the venue fee without going into debt, though it would require using most of my savings and adjusting our honeymoon plans slightly. But we both agreed that the venue was the most important element of our wedding day, the foundation that would set the tone for everything else. This is our once-in-a-lifetime celebration, David said as we pulled into my driveway. If Rosewood Manor is where you want to marry me, then that's where we'll get married. Monday morning, I called my bank and arranged to have a cashier's check prepared for the full $35,000 deposit. The transaction required special authorization due to the amount, and I had to provide multiple forms of identification and documentation about the purpose of the withdrawal. By noon, I was sitting in Patricia's office with the cashier's check in my hands, my heart racing with excitement and nervousness about making such a significant financial commitment. You're making an excellent choice, Patricia assured me as she reviewed the contract terms. September 15th is one of our most popular dates because the weather is typically perfect, and the gardens are at their absolute peak. The roses will be in their second bloom, and the autumn light in the ballroom during your reception will be simply magical. As I signed the contract and handed over the check, Patricia provided me with a comprehensive information packet including vendor recommendations, timeline templates, and access codes for their online planning portal. She also gave me a leather portfolio containing photos of the venue during different seasons and a detailed floor plan of the manor and grounds. These access codes are very important, she emphasized, highlighting a series of numbers and letters on the contract. You'll need them to make any changes to your reservation, communicate with our catering partners, and access the planning materials on our website. Please keep them secure. I carefully filed the contract and access codes in my home office, placing them in the same folder where I kept all our other important wedding documents. David and I celebrated that evening with champagne and takeout from our favorite restaurant, toasting to our perfect venue and the beginning of our detailed wedding planning process. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into planning with the same systematic approach I used for my security business. I created detailed spreadsheets for guest lists, vendor comparisons, and budget tracking. I scheduled tours with photographers who specialized in Rosewood Manor weddings, and met with florists who understood how to complement the natural beauty of the rose garden without overwhelming it. The process was incredibly enjoyable, partly because David was genuinely engaged in the planning rather than treating it as something I should handle alone. We spent evenings together reviewing vendor proposals, discussing menu options, and refining our vision for the ceremony and reception. It felt like we were building something beautiful together, a celebration that would truly reflect our partnership and values. I was so absorbed in the planning process that I barely noticed Camilla's increased interest in our wedding preparations. She began asking detailed questions about every aspect of our plans: the venue layout, the catering options, the vendor selection process, even the specific access codes Patricia had provided for the planning portal. "I'm just so excited for you," she explained when David mentioned her unusual level of curiosity. "I want to make sure I understand all the details so I can be as helpful as possible as your maid of honor." I had reluctantly agreed to include Camilla as a bridesmaid, despite our complicated history, because David had asked me to consider it as a gesture of family unity. Having her as maid of honor was never discussed, but she seemed to have appointed herself to that role and began inserting herself into planning conversations and vendor meetings. "You should really consider having the ceremony earlier in the day," she suggested during one family dinner. 3 o'clock ceremonies photograph better than evening ones, and you'll have more flexibility with your reception timeline." When I mentioned that David and I preferred an evening ceremony for the romantic atmosphere and better acoustics in the gardens, she persisted with alternative suggestions that seemed designed to change fundamental aspects of our vision. "Maybe you should look at other catering options too," she added. "I know Rosewood Manor recommends specific vendors, but there might be better deals available if you're willing to bring in outside companies." Her suggestions always seemed reasonable on the surface, but they consistently pushed us away from the choices David and I had made together, and toward alternatives that would require accessing our planning portal and potentially modifying our contract with the venue. I should have recognized these conversations as reconnaissance missions, gathering the specific information she would need to execute her plan. Instead, I interpreted her interest as typical family involvement in wedding planning, perhaps even a sign that our relationship was improving. 3 months before our wedding, with most of our major vendors booked and our vision finally coming together, I felt confident that everything was perfectly organized and protected. Our contract with Rosewood Manor was secure, our access codes were safely stored, and our dream wedding was finally becoming reality. I had no idea that Camilla was about to use every piece of information she'd gathered to steal not just our venue, but our entire wedding day, turning my careful planning and substantial financial investment into the foundation for her own celebration with her suspicious fiancé Bryce. The first sign that something was wrong came in a casual text message from Patricia Whitmore on a Tuesday morning in June. I was reviewing security protocols for a new client when my phone buzzed with what should have been routine communication. "Hi, Natalie. Just confirming the date change went through smoothly. So excited for the June 22nd celebration. The summer roses will be absolutely stunning for Camilla and Bryce's big day. Let me know if you need anything else. Patricia." I stared at my phone screen, reading the message 3 times before the words finally registered. Date change, June 22nd, Camilla and Bryce. My hands started trembling as the implications hit me like a physical blow. I immediately called Patricia, my heart pounding as I waited for her to answer. "Rosewood Manor, this is Patricia speaking." "Patricia, this is Natalie Chen. I just received your text message, and there's been some kind of mistake. I never authorized any date changes, and I have no idea why you're mentioning Camilla and Bryce." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I'm looking at the paperwork right now, Natalie. The modification request came through our online portal on Friday afternoon. The reservation has been transferred from September 15th for Natalie Chen and David Hartwell to June 22nd for Camilla Hartwell and Bryce Thornton. The request included your access codes and a signed authorization form. My vision started to blur as the full scope of what had happened became clear. "Patricia, I never signed any authorization form. I never requested any changes. Someone has stolen my wedding venue." "Oh my God," Patricia whispered. "Are you saying this was unauthorized? The documentation looked completely legitimate. The access codes matched our records perfectly, and the signature appeared authentic. Can you reverse this? Can you put my original date back?" Another pause, longer this time. The September 15th date was released back into our available inventory as soon as the change was processed. It was booked by another couple within hours. "I'm so sorry, Natalie, but I don't know how we can fix this. If the authorization was fraudulent, this is a legal matter." I hung up the phone and sat in my office chair, staring blankly at the wall while the reality of the situation settled over me. Camilla hadn't just stolen my wedding venue. She had systematically planned and executed a fraud that had stolen $35,000 of my money and destroyed months of careful planning. My phone rang immediately. "David." "Hey, I was just thinking about dinner plans tonight, and I wanted to—" "David," I interrupted, my voice barely steady. "We need to talk. Can you come over right now?" "What's wrong? You sound—" "Camilla stole our wedding venue. She transferred Rosewood Manor to her name for her wedding to Bryce. We've lost everything." The silence on David's end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "What do you mean she stole it?" "I mean she somehow got our access codes, forged my signature, and transferred our entire reservation to her name." Patricia just confirmed it. "We're scheduled for June 22nd under Camilla and Bryce's names. Our September date has already been booked by someone else." "That's impossible. Camilla wouldn't do something like that. There has to be an explanation." Even in the midst of my devastation, I felt a flicker of anger at his immediate defense of his sister. "David, there's no innocent explanation for this. She committed fraud. She stole $35,000 from us. I'm coming over, he said grimly. Don't do anything until I get there. While I waited for David, I called my attorney, Marcus Sterling, who specialized in contract law and had handled several cases for my security business. After explaining the situation, his advice was both clear and discouraging. This is definitely fraud, he confirmed, but proving it will be challenging if she used your legitimate access codes and provided what appears to be your signature. Venue contracts typically include clauses that protect them from exactly this type of dispute. Your primary legal recourse would be against Camilla personally, not against Rosewood Manor. So we can't get our venue back? Probably not, unless you can prove the venue was negligent in processing the change. But if they followed their standard verification procedures and the documentation appeared legitimate, they fulfilled their contractual obligations. When David arrived 30 minutes later, his face was grim and his usual composed demeanor had cracked. I called Camilla, he said without preamble. She's not answering her phone. Of course she's not. She knows exactly what she's done. Let's go over there. I want to hear her explanation face to face. We drove to Camilla's apartment in tense silence, both of us processing the enormity of what had happened. I was cycling between rage, devastation, and a growing sense of disbelief that someone could be so calculating and cruel. David seemed to be struggling with his own internal conflict between family loyalty and the undeniable evidence of his sister's betrayal. Camilla answered her door wearing a silk robe and looking perfectly composed, as if she'd been expecting us. David, Natalie, what a nice surprise. Come in, come in. Cut the act, Camilla, David said sharply. We know what you did with Rosewood Manor. Her expression shifted slightly, but she maintained her innocent facade. What are you talking about? I don't understand. You stole our wedding venue, I said flatly. You somehow got our access codes, forged my signature, and transferred our reservation to your name. Our $35,000 deposit is now funding your wedding to Bryce. Camilla's eyes widened with what would have been convincing surprise if I hadn't known better. That's a terrible accusation, Natalie. Why would you think I would do something like that? Because Patricia Whitmore confirmed it an hour ago. The reservation has been changed from September 15th for David and me to June 22nd for you and Bryce. There's documentation with my forged signature authorizing the transfer. For a moment, Camilla's mask slipped, and I saw a flash of satisfaction in her eyes before she composed herself again. Well, that does sound like a terrible mix-up. Maybe there was some kind of administrative error at the venue? Don't lie to me, David said, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. This isn't a mix-up, and you know it. How did you get Natalie's access codes? Camilla moved to her kitchen and poured herself a glass of wine with deliberate casualness. I honestly don't know what you're talking about, but if there has been some kind of mistake with the venue, I'm sure we can work it out. Maybe we can share the space somehow? The suggestion was so absurd and insulting that I actually laughed. Share the space? Camilla, you stole my wedding. You took $35,000 of my money. You destroyed months of planning. And now you want to suggest we share? I think you're being very dramatic, Natalie. These things happen with wedding venues. Mix-ups, double bookings, administrative errors. It's unfortunate, but it's not personal. It's not personal? I stepped closer to her, my professional training in reading people telling me everything I needed to know about her calculated performance. You specifically chose the same venue David and I booked. You somehow obtained access codes that only I should have had. You forged my signature on legal documents. This is fraud, Camilla, criminal fraud. She took another sip of wine, her composure never wavering. That sounds like a very serious accusation. I hope you have proof of these claims before you start throwing around words like fraud and criminal. David had been watching this exchange with growing anger, and now he stepped forward. Where's Bryce? I want to talk to him about this. Bryce is handling some business matters this week. He'll be back for the wedding, obviously. What business matters? I pressed. What exactly does Bryce do for a living, Camilla? Because I've never gotten a straight answer about his work or his background. Her eyes flashed with anger for just a moment before she controlled herself. Bryce is a very successful businessman with international investments. Just because you don't understand his industry doesn't mean there's anything suspicious about it. Then why won't he provide straight answers about his company or his clients? Why are all his business references so vague? Maybe because he values privacy and discretion in his professional life. Some people don't feel the need to broadcast every detail of their careers for validation. The insult was clear, but I was beyond caring about her attempts to provoke me. Camilla, I want you to contact Rosewood Manor right now and reverse this transfer. Put our reservation back to September 15th under our names. She laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth. Even if I wanted to do that, which I don't, it's impossible. Bryce and I have already sent save the dates to our guests. The invitations are being printed, the vendors are booked. You can't expect us to cancel our entire wedding based on your paranoid theories about venue mix-ups. It's not a theory, David said quietly. You stole from us, Camilla. From your own brother and his fiancée. How could you do something like this? For the first time, Camilla's facade cracked completely, and the real person underneath emerged. How could I do this? How could you choose her over your own family? How could you build this perfect little life with someone who thinks she's better than all of us? This isn't about choosing anyone over anyone else, David replied. This is about you committing fraud and stealing from people who trusted you. Trusted me? Camilla's voice rose to a near shout. When have you ever trusted me, David? When have either of you included me in anything important? You get engaged and plan this elaborate wedding like I don't even exist, like my feelings don't matter at all. So you decided to steal our venue as revenge? I asked, incredulous. I didn't steal anything. I found a way to have the wedding I deserve at a venue that actually appreciates what I can bring to their reputation. Rosewood Manor should host weddings for people who understand elegance and sophistication, not security guards playing dress-up. The mask was completely off now, and I was seeing the real Camilla, bitter, entitled, and completely without remorse for what she'd done. David stared at his sister as if seeing her for the first time. You're not sorry at all, are you? You're actually proud of what you've done. I'm proud that I finally stopped letting you two treat me like I'm invisible. I'm proud that my wedding is going to be everything yours would have been, except better. As we left Camilla's apartment and walked back to our car in stunned silence, I realized that confronting her had accomplished nothing except confirming the scope of her betrayal and her complete lack of remorse. She had no intention of reversing what she'd done, and she clearly believed she was justified in her actions. But what I didn't tell David as we drove away was that seeing Camilla's true nature so clearly had crystallized something important for me. This wasn't just about a stolen venue anymore. This was about someone who had declared war on my future happiness, and I had resources she couldn't even imagine for fighting back. The morning after our confrontation with Camilla, I sat in my office at Sentinel Security Solutions with a cup of coffee and a clear mission. If Camilla wanted to play games involving fraud and deception, she just challenged someone who made a living uncovering exactly those kinds of schemes. My hurt and anger had crystallized into cold, professional determination. It was time to find out exactly who Bryce Thornton really was and what kind of operation I was dealing with. I started with the basics, running Bryce through every database I had access to as a licensed security professional. The results were immediately suspicious. While there was a Bryce Thornton with a legitimate social security number and basic credit history, the deeper I dug, the more inconsistencies I found. His supposed employment history was a patchwork of lies. The London investment firm he claimed to work for, Meridian Capital International, existed only as a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, with no actual business operations. The Manhattan address he'd given for his family's estate was a luxury apartment building where no one by the name of Thornton had ever been a resident or owner. Most tellingly, his financial profile didn't match someone with generational wealth or international business success. His credit report showed a pattern of opening and closing accounts rapidly, always staying just within legal limits, but never building the kind of long-term financial stability you'd expect from someone with his claimed background. I called Jake Morrison, a former FBI agent who now ran background investigations for high-net-worth clients and had become one of my most trusted professional contacts. Within 2 hours, Jake had confirmed my suspicions and uncovered information that made my blood run cold. "Your sister-in-law's fiancé is definitely not who he claims to be," Jake told me over a secure phone line. "His real name is Bryce Hutchinson, and he's got a history you need to know about. I'm sending you a file right now." The file Jake sent revealed that Bryce had been operating various identity fraud schemes for at least 5 years. He specialized in targeting wealthy families through romantic relationships, using fake business credentials and manufactured personal histories to gain access to their financial resources and social networks. His previous victims included a real estate heiress in South Carolina who lost $200,000 to his fake investment opportunities, a doctor's daughter in Colorado who discovered he'd been using her family's social connections to run insurance scams, and a tech executive's sister in California who nearly lost her inheritance to his elaborate cryptocurrency scheme. The pattern was always the same. Meet a woman from a wealthy family through carefully orchestrated social events, create an impressive but false backstory about business success and family wealth, move the relationship quickly toward marriage, and use the engagement period to exploit the family's financial resources and business connections. Most disturbing was what happened to his previous victims when they discovered his true identity. 2 had been subjected to elaborate revenge schemes when they tried to expose him, including identity theft and professional sabotage that destroyed their reputations and careers. 1 had been forced to declare bankruptcy after he systematically drained her accounts and used her information to take out fraudulent loans in her name. "This guy is dangerous, Natalie," Jake warned me. "He's not just a con artist. He's vindictive and strategic about destroying people who threaten him. If your sister-in-law is working with him to steal your wedding venue, this is probably just the beginning of whatever they're planning." I spent the rest of the day researching Bryce's known associates and methods, building a comprehensive profile of his operations. What I discovered made me realize that Camilla had either been incredibly unlucky in choosing a fiancé, or she had deliberately sought out someone with the skills and criminal background necessary to execute sophisticated fraud schemes. The timing of their meeting wasn't coincidental either. The charity polo match where Camilla claimed to have met Bryce was actually a known hunting ground for con artists targeting wealthy women. Bryce had been photographed at similar events across the Northeast, always appearing with different identities and backstories, but following the same playbook. More troubling was evidence that Bryce had been researching the Hartwell family for months before he ever approached Camilla. I found records of him accessing public property databases for Jonathan's real estate holdings, researching Priscilla's charity affiliations, and even visiting David's law firm under a false pretense about needing legal representation for international business matters. But the smoking gun came when I accessed security footage from my own office building. 3 weeks before Camilla and Bryce's engagement, someone had attempted to break into my office after hours. The figure caught on camera was too far away to identify definitively, but the height, build, and movement patterns matched Bryce's profile. The attempted break-in suddenly made sense. He'd been trying to access my files to learn more about my security business, my financial situation, and potentially find information he could use to compromise my relationship with David or my professional reputation. I immediately called my IT specialist, Carmen Rodriguez, who handled cybersecurity for Sentinel Security Solutions. "Carmen, I need you to run a complete audit of all our systems for the past 6 months. Check for any unauthorized access attempts, data breaches, or suspicious activity." What Carmen found was chilling. Someone with sophisticated hacking skills had attempted multiple times to access our client database, our financial records, and our internal communication systems. The attempts had been unsuccessful due to our military-grade security protocols, but the persistent and targeted nature of the attacks suggested professional-level criminal intent. Whoever was trying to get into our systems knew exactly what they were looking for, Carmen reported. They weren't phishing randomly. They were targeting specific types of information about your business operations and personal finances. This wasn't some amateur trying to steal credit card numbers. This was someone conducting detailed reconnaissance. The pieces were falling into place now. Bryce wasn't just running a simple romance scam on Camilla. He was orchestrating a comprehensive attack on my entire life. The wedding venue theft was probably just the opening move in a larger scheme designed to destroy my business, my relationship, and my financial stability. I started cross-referencing the timing of the cyber attacks with Camilla's questions about my business and my wedding planning. Every time she had asked about vendor contracts, security protocols, or financial arrangements, there had been corresponding attempts to access our digital systems. She hadn't just been gathering information for casual conversation. She'd been conducting intelligence operations on behalf of someone with serious criminal intent. The most damaging revelation came when I analyzed our email servers. Someone had successfully accessed my personal email account twice in the past month, coinciding perfectly with when Camilla would have needed my Rosewood Manor access codes and signature samples to execute the venue theft. They hadn't just stolen my wedding, they'd been systematically compromising my digital security, my business operations, and my personal information as part of what appeared to be a long-term plan to destroy everything I'd worked to build. I called David immediately. "We need to meet tonight. I've discovered some things about Bryce that change everything about this situation." "What kind of things?" "The kind that mean your sister isn't just a bridezilla who stole our venue. She's working with a professional criminal who's been planning an attack on our entire lives for months." That evening, I presented David with everything I'd uncovered about Bryce's real identity, his criminal history, and the evidence of systematic attacks on my business and personal security. I watched his face change as he processed the scope of what we were dealing with. "You're saying this was all planned from the beginning? That Camilla deliberately found a criminal to help her steal from us?" "I'm saying that either your sister is the unluckiest person in the world when it comes to choosing fiancés, or she specifically sought out someone with the skills necessary to execute sophisticated fraud and revenge schemes. The evidence suggests the latter." David sat in stunned silence for several minutes, staring at the documentation I'd spread across my kitchen table. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "What do we do now?" "Now we stop being victims and start being strategic. I've spent my entire career protecting people from threats exactly like this. It's time to use those skills to protect us." I had already begun formulating a plan that would use every resource at my disposal. My security company's capabilities, my professional network, my knowledge of surveillance and investigation techniques, and my access to buildings and systems throughout the city. Bryce and Camilla thought they were dealing with a naive bride who would crumble under their attack. They were about to discover they'd picked a fight with someone who had spent years learning how to neutralize sophisticated threats, and who had the professional resources to turn their own tactics against them in ways they couldn't possibly anticipate. The wedding venue theft had been their declaration of war. But they'd made a critical mistake. They'd targeted someone who was uniquely equipped to fight back, and who now had both the motivation and the means to ensure they'd regret ever thinking they could destroy my life and get away with it. Armed with comprehensive evidence of Bryce's criminal history and the systematic nature of his attacks on my business and personal life, I knew this situation had moved far beyond family drama or civil fraud. I was dealing with a professional criminal organization, and that meant it was time to involve law enforcement. But given Bryce's history of evading prosecution and retaliating against victims who reported him, I needed to be strategic about how I approached the authorities. My first call was to Detective Ray Sullivan at the Millfield County Financial Crimes Unit. Ray and I had worked together on several cases where my security company had uncovered evidence of embezzlement or fraud among our corporate clients. He understood my investigative capabilities and trusted my professional judgment when I brought him serious cases. "Ray, I need to meet with you about a multi-state fraud operation that's targeting my family," I told him over a secure phone line. "The suspect has a history of sophisticated identity theft, investment fraud, and systematic retaliation against victims. This isn't just about a stolen wedding venue anymore." We met that afternoon at the police station, where I presented Ray with everything Jake Morrison and I had uncovered about Bryce's criminal history, his false identity, and the evidence of his systematic attacks on my business systems. Ray studied the documentation carefully, his expression growing more serious, as he reviewed the scope of Bryce's previous crimes. "This guy is definitely a career criminal," he agreed. "But I have to tell you, Natalie, cases like this can be incredibly difficult to prosecute. He's careful about staying just within certain legal boundaries, and his victims often don't come forward because they're embarrassed or afraid of retaliation. But we have evidence of identity fraud, cybercrimes, and systematic harassment. Plus, the venue theft involves forged documents and unauthorized access to secure accounts. We do have evidence, and that's more than most of his previous victims were able to provide. The problem is jurisdiction. His crimes cross multiple state lines, and some of his activities might fall under federal rather than state prosecution." Ray leaned back in his chair, considering the situation. "I'm going to make some calls to colleagues in other states where he's operated. If we can coordinate with their investigations and build a comprehensive case, we might be able to put together something that sticks." Over the next 3 days, Ray worked with law enforcement agencies in South Carolina, Colorado, and California to compare notes on Bryce's previous operations. What they discovered was even more extensive than what Jake had initially uncovered. Bryce was part of a loose network of con artists who shared information, techniques, and sometimes coordinated their schemes across multiple states. "This is bigger than one guy running romance scams," Ray told me during our follow-up meeting. "We're looking at an organized criminal enterprise that specializes in targeting wealthy families through multiple vectors: romance fraud, business scams, identity theft, and systematic harassment of anyone who threatens their operations." The FBI was already investigating the network from a federal level, but they needed more recent evidence and active cases to build prosecutable charges. My documentation of Bryce's current activities provided exactly what they needed to move forward with their investigation. Agent Sarah Matthews from the FBI's white-collar crime unit contacted me directly within 48 hours of Ray's referral. "Ms. Chen, we've been tracking Mr. Hutchinson and his associates for over a year, but we haven't had access to someone with your investigative capabilities who is actively being targeted by their operation." We met at a secure location outside the city, where Agent Matthews briefed me on the scope of the federal investigation. The network Bryce was part of had defrauded victims of over $3.2 million across 8 states, and they were suspected of involvement in more serious crimes, including money laundering and coordinated cyber attacks on small businesses. "Your sister-in-law may have thought she was just finding a wealthy fiancé to help her steal your wedding venue," Agent Matthews explained. "But she's actually become an accessory to a federal criminal enterprise. The venue theft is probably the least serious charge she'll face if we can prove she was knowingly involved in their broader operations." The FBI had been struggling to gather real-time intelligence on the network's activities because their previous victims had been too intimidated or financially devastated to cooperate with extended investigations. But my unique position as both a victim and a security professional with the resources to fight back made me an invaluable asset to their case. "We'd like to propose a cooperative arrangement," Agent Matthews continued. "You continue your normal activities and wedding planning as if you're unaware of our investigation, while we monitor their communications and document their ongoing criminal activities. Your security company's surveillance capabilities could be invaluable in gathering evidence." The FBI's plan was ambitious and risky. They wanted me to act as bait while they built their case, allowing Bryce and Camilla to believe their scheme was succeeding, while federal agents documented every aspect of their criminal enterprise. In exchange, they would provide me with protection, and ensure that any evidence I gathered would be used to prosecute not just Bryce and Camilla, but the entire network they were part of. "What about my wedding?" I asked. "Are you expecting me to let them keep Rosewood Manor while you build your case?" Agent Matthews smiled grimly. "Actually, we're hoping you'll help us turn their wedding day into the conclusion of our investigation. Nothing would be more satisfying than arresting the entire network while they're celebrating what they think is their biggest score." The timeline was tight but feasible. Camilla and Bryce's wedding was scheduled for June 22nd, just 5 weeks away. The FBI needed that time to coordinate with other agencies, set up surveillance operations, and prepare arrest warrants for multiple suspects across several states. My role would be to maintain the appearance of being a defeated victim while actually serving as an intelligence asset for the federal investigation. I would continue my normal business operations while covertly documenting any further attempts by Bryce's network to compromise my systems or harass my clients. "There is one risk you need to understand," Agent Matthews warned me. "If Hutchinson realizes we're investigating him, he has a history of escalating his attacks on the primary victims. Previous targets have faced identity theft, professional sabotage, and in one case physical intimidation. We'll provide protection, but you need to be aware that cooperating with this investigation could put you in additional danger." I thought about the months of planning Bryce and Camilla had already put into destroying my life, the evidence of their systematic attacks on my business, and the contemptuous way Camilla had dismissed my devastation over the stolen venue. The choice was clear. "Agent Matthews, I've spent my entire career protecting other people from threats like this. If I can help you take down this entire network and prevent them from victimizing other families, then I'm absolutely willing to cooperate with your investigation." The formal cooperation agreement was signed within 24 hours, establishing me as a confidential informant in the FBI's investigation of Bryce's criminal network. I was provided with secure communication devices, emergency contact protocols, and surveillance equipment that would allow me to document any further criminal activities while maintaining my cover as an unsuspecting victim. The most crucial element of the plan was timing. The FBI needed Bryce and Camilla to believe they had successfully stolen my wedding and destroyed my happiness while they prepared for their own celebration. Meanwhile, federal agents would be positioning themselves throughout Rosewood Manor and the surrounding area, ready to arrest not just Bryce and Camilla, but any other network members who attended the wedding. "We're going to turn their moment of triumph into the end of their criminal enterprise," Agent Matthews told me during our final planning meeting. "And you're going to get front row seats to watch justice being served." As I left the FBI field office that evening, I felt a sense of satisfaction I hadn't experienced since discovering the venue theft. Camilla and Bryce thought they had targeted a naive bride who would crumble under their attack. Instead, they had picked a fight with someone who had the professional expertise, federal connections, and resources necessary to orchestrate their complete downfall. The wedding venue theft had been their declaration of war against my happiness and success. But their victory celebration at Rosewood Manor was about to become the scene of their arrest and the dismantling of their entire criminal operation. They had stolen my wedding day, but I was about to give them a celebration they would never forget. One that would end with federal charges, prison sentences, and the complete destruction of the criminal enterprise they had spent years building. The countdown to June 22nd had begun, and for the first time since discovering their betrayal, I was looking forward to that date with anticipation rather than devastation. In the 3 weeks following my agreement to cooperate with the FBI investigation, Bryce and Camilla's true nature revealed itself in ways that eliminated any remaining doubt about their criminal intent and complete lack of conscience. What I discovered during this period made me realize that the wedding venue theft had been just the appetizer in a much more elaborate scheme designed to destroy every aspect of my life. The first revelation came through the surveillance equipment Agent Matthews had provided. Hidden cameras and audio devices in my office captured Bryce conducting reconnaissance on my building during off hours, photographing security systems, noting employees' schedules, and even attempting to plant listening devices in the lobby area, where clients often discussed sensitive business matters. More disturbing was evidence that he had been systematically researching my clients and attempting to undermine my business relationships. Through monitored phone calls and intercepted communications, I learned that Bryce had been contacting several of my high-profile clients, posing as a concerned business associate, and spreading false information about my company's financial stability and security protocols. Ms. Chen's business has been experiencing some serious difficulties lately, I heard him tell Harrison Blake from Meridian Financial Group in a recorded conversation. I thought you should know that there have been some security breaches in her systems, and several of her employees are being investigated for selling client information to competitors. The lies were sophisticated and designed specifically to exploit the paranoia that naturally exists in the financial security industry. By suggesting that my company had been compromised, Bryce was attempting to trigger contract cancellations that would destroy my reputation and financial stability. What made this particularly insidious was that he was using inside information Camilla had gathered about my business operations to make his lies sound credible. She had been systematically collecting details about my clients, my security protocols, and my employee relationships during family dinners and casual conversations, then passing that intelligence to Bryce for his sabotage campaign. The scope of their collaboration became even clearer when I discovered that Camilla had been actively recruiting other family members into their scheme. Through recorded conversations, I learned that she had convinced Jonathan and Priscilla to provide Bryce with detailed financial information about the family's assets, supposedly for investment opportunities he was offering them. Bryce has access to some incredible opportunities through his international connections, I heard Camilla tell her parents during a family dinner I hadn't attended. He's offering to help us diversify our portfolio with some exclusive European real estate investments that aren't available through traditional brokers. Jonathan and Priscilla, impressed by Bryce's supposed sophistication and eager to believe their daughter had finally found a successful partner, were providing him with bank account numbers, investment portfolio details, and even personal identification information that could be used for identity theft. He needs to verify our financial capacity before he can include us in these deals, Priscilla explained to David during one of their conversations. It's standard practice for high-level investments. Bryce is being very generous by even considering us for these opportunities. The FBI agents monitoring these communications were building a comprehensive case for elder financial abuse, identity theft, and investment fraud. But what they discovered next elevated the charges to an entirely different level. Agent Matthews called me to an emergency meeting after intercepting communications between Bryce and other members of his criminal network. We've uncovered evidence that they're planning something much more serious than investment fraud, she told me grimly. They're discussing a comprehensive identity theft operation that would involve stealing and selling personal information from all your business clients. The plan was elaborate and would have been devastating if executed successfully. Using the access codes and security information Camilla had helped him gather, Bryce intended to breach my company's client database and steal sensitive personal and financial information from dozens of high-net-worth individuals and corporations. They're not just planning to defraud your in-laws, Agent Matthews continued. They're planning to use your business as a vehicle for stealing information that could be sold to other criminal organizations for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The intercepted communications revealed that Bryce had already been in contact with identity theft rings in 3 different states, negotiating prices for the type of high-value personal information my security clients typically provided during background checks and security assessments. But the most chilling discovery came when FBI surveillance captured a conversation between Bryce and an unknown associate about what they called cleanup protocols for dealing with me after their scheme was complete. The security consultant is going to be a problem once she realizes the scope of what we've taken, Bryce said in a conversation recorded just 1 week before his scheduled wedding. She has too many law enforcement connections and too much investigative experience to just disappear quietly like the others. His associate's response made my blood run cold. What are you thinking? The usual reputation destruction, or do we need to consider more permanent solutions? Let's start with complete financial and professional destruction, Bryce replied. Identity theft, criminal charges planted in her background, maybe some evidence that she's been selling client information to competitors. If that's not enough to neutralize her, we can escalate to physical intimidation. Agent Matthews immediately increased my security detail after this conversation was intercepted. This isn't just about fraud anymore, Natalie. They're discussing tactics that could put you in serious physical danger. We need to accelerate our timeline and make sure we have enough evidence to arrest them before they can implement any of these escalation plans. The final piece of evidence that eliminated any remaining sympathy I might have felt for Camilla came through a recording of her conversation with a friend about the wedding venue theft. Far from being manipulated by Bryce into criminal behavior, the recording revealed that she had been the mastermind behind the personal attacks on my life. You should have seen Natalie's face when she realized I'd stolen her precious venue, Camilla laughed during a phone conversation with her college roommate Madison. She actually thought she deserved Rosewood Manor more than I did, like some security guard could ever be worthy of a venue that sophisticated. But wasn't she your brother's fiancée? Madison asked. Didn't you feel bad about ruining her wedding? Feel bad? Madison, she needed to learn her place in this family. David was getting way too serious about someone so inappropriate. I mean, she owns a security company, basically a cleaning lady with a gun license. The idea that she thought she could marry into our family and be treated as an equal was honestly insulting. The venom in Camilla's voice as she described her motivations made it clear that this had never been about the venue itself. It had been about establishing dominance, about reminding me that I would never be good enough for the Hartwell family, and about destroying the happiness she couldn't tolerate me having. Besides, Camilla continued, Bryce showed me how we could turn this into something much more profitable than just stealing her wedding. By the time we're done, she'll lose her business, her reputation, and probably David too. No one will ever take her seriously again. When Agent Matthews played this recording for me, I felt the last vestiges of family loyalty and moral complexity disappear. This wasn't a case of someone being manipulated into bad decisions by a criminal boyfriend. This was a calculated, malicious campaign designed to destroy my life for the crime of being successful and happy. I want them stopped, I told Agent Matthews. Whatever resources you need from me, whatever risks I need to take, I want this entire operation shut down permanently. We're ready to move, she assured me. We have enough evidence now to charge both of them with multiple federal crimes. Plus, we can roll up at least 6 other members of their network. The wedding day arrests will be the culmination of a year-long investigation that's going to put these people away for a very long time. As June 22nd approached, I found myself looking forward to Camilla and Bryce's wedding day with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt since discovering their betrayal. They thought they were celebrating their victory over me, their successful theft of my dreams, and their launch into a lucrative criminal enterprise. Instead, their wedding day was going to become the day federal agents dismantled their entire operation, arrested their criminal network, and ensured that their celebration ended with handcuffs, federal charges, and prison sentences that would remove them from society for years. The venue they had stolen from me was about to become the scene of their complete and permanent downfall. And I was going to have the satisfaction of watching justice being served to people who had deliberately chosen to cause maximum harm to someone who had never done anything to deserve their cruelty. Camilla had wanted to teach me my place in the family hierarchy. Instead, she was about to learn that some people fight back with resources and determination she couldn't even comprehend. June 22nd dawned with the kind of perfect weather that would have made any bride feel blessed. Clear blue skies, gentle breeze, and the promise of a stunning sunset for evening photographs. As I drove toward Rosewood Manor for what Camilla believed would be her triumph and my final humiliation, I felt a calm sense of anticipation that had replaced the rage and devastation I'd carried for months. Agent Matthews had briefed me on the final operational details the night before. 15 FBI agents were already positioned throughout the estate and surrounding area, disguised as catering staff, photographers, security personnel, and even wedding guests. Additional agents from multiple state agencies were coordinating the simultaneous arrests of other network members who would be attending the ceremony. Remember, maintain your cover as the bitter ex-future sister-in-law until we give the signal, Agent Matthews had instructed. Camilla and Bryce need to believe they've won completely. The more confident and relaxed they are, the easier it will be to execute the arrests without incident. My role was to arrive at the venue as if I were reluctantly fulfilling some family obligation, perhaps to return something or handle a final detail related to the venue transfer. David would arrive separately, maintaining the appearance that our relationship had been damaged by Camilla's successful theft of our wedding. As I pulled into the circular driveway of Rosewood Manor, seeing the grounds decorated for someone else's wedding with flowers I had chosen and arrangements I had planned, I experienced a moment of genuine grief for what had been stolen from me. But that sadness was quickly replaced by satisfaction as I spotted FBI Agent Torres disguised as a member of the catering team, Agent Kim positioned as a wedding photographer, and Agent Chen blending in with the early arriving guests. The manor looked exactly as beautiful as I had imagined it would for my own wedding. White roses and peonies adorned every surface. Elegant drapery transformed the gardens into a fairy tale setting, and the ballroom visible through the French doors sparkled with the crystal chandeliers I had fallen in love with during my original tour. Camilla was in the bridal suite, surrounded by her bridesmaids and a team of professional stylists who were putting the finishing touches on her wedding day look. When I knocked on the door claiming I needed to retrieve some personal items I'd left in Patricia's office during the venue planning process, Camilla's face lit up with unmistakable glee. "Natalie!" she exclaimed, practically glowing with satisfaction. "How wonderful that you came to see how beautiful everything looks. I hope you can appreciate how much more elegant this wedding is than whatever you were planning." She was stunning in her custom Vera Wang gown, her hair swept into an elaborate updo adorned with pearl pins, her makeup flawless. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked genuinely happy and radiant, completely unaware that her perfect day was about to become the worst day of her life. "The venue does look beautiful," I admitted, which was completely true. "I'm sure your guests will be very impressed." "Oh, they are already," Camilla beamed. "Did you see the guest list? We have the mayor, 3 state senators, and half the social register of Connecticut. Bryce's business connections are truly impressive." What she didn't know was that several of those impressive connections were actually FBI agents using false identities to infiltrate the wedding and gather intelligence on other criminal network members who might be in attendance. As I moved through the venue, ostensibly checking on final details with Patricia, I discreetly confirmed the positions of various FBI agents and noted the arrival of several individuals whose photos I'd seen in the criminal network files. Bryce's groomsmen included at least 2 men who were wanted for fraud in other states, and several of the elegant guests were actually accomplices in previous schemes. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. in the Rose Garden, with cocktail hour in the Manor's library followed by dinner and dancing in the grand ballroom. Agent Matthews had timed the arrests for the moment immediately after the ceremony concluded, when all the principals would be together for photographs and the guests would be moving to cocktail hour. At 3:45 p.m., I took my position in the back of the gathered guests, wearing a simple navy dress that Patricia had complimented as very appropriate for the occasion. David arrived separately and sat several rows ahead of me, maintaining the appearance that we were barely speaking to each other. The processional began with Camilla's bridesmaids walking down the petal-strewn aisle, followed by Camilla herself on Jonathan's arm. She looked radiant and triumphant, clearly savoring what she believed was her moment of complete victory over me. Her smile as she walked toward Bryce was pure satisfaction, not just joy about marrying the man she loved, but glee about having successfully destroyed my happiness. Bryce stood at the altar looking handsome and confident in his custom tuxedo, the picture of a successful businessman about to marry into a prominent family. He had no idea that FBI surveillance had documented every aspect of his criminal operations, or that agents were positioned throughout the garden, ready to move the moment the ceremony concluded. The efficient and elegant older gentleman who specialized in high society weddings began the ceremony with traditional words about love, commitment, and the joining of two lives. As he spoke about honesty, trust, and building a life together based on shared values, I had to suppress a bitter laugh at the irony. If anyone knows of any lawful reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace, the officiant announced, following the traditional ceremony format. I remained silent, as did everyone else in the gathered crowd. This wasn't the moment for dramatic revelations that would come in just a few minutes, when federal agents would speak with far more authority than any wedding guest ever could. The vows were elaborate and personalized, with both Camilla and Bryce speaking about their dreams for the future, their commitment to supporting each other through any challenges, and their excitement about building something beautiful together. Camilla's vows specifically mentioned how grateful she was for Bryce's unwavering support during family situations, and how much she valued his commitment to protecting her happiness. Bryce's vows were equally ironic, promising to cherish and protect Camilla, to provide for their future together, and to handle any threats to their happiness with whatever resources necessary. If the gathered guests had known what those resources actually included, they might have been less charmed by his romantic promises. The ring exchange proceeded smoothly, with Camilla practically glowing as Bryce slipped the wedding band onto her finger. Her engagement ring, that massive diamond that had announced their whirlwind romance, caught the afternoon sunlight and created rainbow patterns across her white dress. By the power vested in me by the state of Connecticut, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. As Bryce and Camilla shared their first kiss as a married couple, the gathered guests erupted in applause and congratulations. For exactly 30 seconds, they experienced the pinnacle of their scheme's success. They had stolen my wedding venue, used it for their own celebration, and surrounded themselves with the social and criminal connections they believed would fund their future prosperity. Then Agent Matthews stepped forward from her position among the catering staff, badge clearly visible, and the fairy tale ended. Bryce Hutchinson, Camilla Hartwell Hutchinson, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, cybercrimes, and elder financial abuse. The garden erupted in confused murmurs as FBI agents emerged from their positions throughout the crowd, moving efficiently to secure the scene and detain multiple suspects simultaneously. Bryce's face went completely white as he realized what was happening, while Camilla looked around in bewildered panic, her wedding bouquet still clutched in her hands. You have the right to remain silent, Agent Matthews continued as other agents moved to restrain both the bride and groom. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The elegant wedding guests scattered in confusion as FBI agents systematically identified and detained several additional individuals who were part of Bryce's criminal network. The rose garden that had been decorated for romance and celebration became a crime scene, with federal agents documenting evidence and processing arrests. Camilla's wedding dress, that symbol of her triumph over me, was now stained with tears and grass as she was handcuffed in front of the same guests she had invited to witness her victory. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup was running, and her dreams of social prominence were crumbling in real time. This is a mistake, she screamed as agents led her toward the waiting vehicles. We haven't done anything wrong. This is all because of her. She turned to stare at me with wild eyes. This is your fault, Natalie. You destroyed my wedding. I met her gaze calmly, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction as I watched justice being served. No, Camilla, I replied clearly enough for everyone to hear. You destroyed your own life when you decided to steal from me. Today is just the consequences catching up with you. As the FBI vehicles drove away from Rosewood Manor with my former sister-in-law and her criminal husband in custody, I stood in the rose garden where I should have been married, watching the sun set over the venue that had been stolen from me and then reclaimed through justice. The wedding venue theft had been their declaration of war against my happiness. Their arrest at the altar was my declaration that some people fight back with resources, determination, and allies they could never have imagined. 6 months after watching federal agents arrest Camilla and Bryce at the altar of my stolen wedding venue, I stood in the same rose garden at Rosewood Manor, but this time wearing my own wedding dress and carrying my own bouquet. The journey from devastation to justice to healing had transformed me in ways I never could have anticipated. And now David and I were finally celebrating the wedding we had always dreamed of. The legal aftermath of the FBI operation had been swift and comprehensive. Bryce, whose real name was confirmed as Bryce Hutchinson, was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for his role in the multi-state criminal enterprise. The charges included identity theft, wire fraud, money laundering, cybercrimes, and elder financial abuse. His criminal network, which had defrauded victims of over $3.2 million, was completely dismantled with arrests across 8 states. Camilla's fate was more complicated but equally definitive. Initially, she had attempted to claim ignorance about Bryce's criminal background, insisting she had been manipulated by someone she believed was a legitimate businessman. However, the recorded conversations where she discussed her malicious motivations for stealing my venue, combined with evidence of her active participation in recruiting family members for fraud schemes, made her complicity undeniable. She ultimately accepted a plea agreement that resulted in a 4-year federal sentence for conspiracy to commit fraud and elder financial abuse. Her lawyer had argued for probation based on her supposed manipulation by Bryce, but the prosecution's evidence of her calculated cruelty and deliberate participation in targeting family members convinced the judge that imprisonment was necessary. Ms. Hartwell demonstrated a callous disregard for the well-being of her own family members, Judge Patricia Morrison stated during sentencing. Her actions went far beyond poor judgment or being misled by a criminal associate. She actively participated in schemes designed to cause maximum emotional and financial harm to people who trusted her. The financial restitution was substantial. The government's asset forfeiture actions recovered most of the money Bryce's network had stolen, including the $35,000 he had used from my wedding venue deposit. But more importantly, I received compensation for the business losses I had suffered from their sabotage campaign, the security upgrades I had been forced to implement, and the emotional distress caused by their systematic harassment. Patricia Whitmore from Rosewood Manor had been genuinely horrified when she learned the full scope of what had happened. In 30 years of managing this venue, I've never experienced anything like this, she told me during one of our meetings to discuss the legal implications. The fact that someone would use our venue as a tool for such elaborate fraud and family destruction is deeply disturbing. Rosewood Manor's management not only cooperated fully with the FBI investigation, but they also offered to host my actual wedding at no charge once the legal proceedings were concluded. We feel partially responsible for facilitating this crime, even though we were deceived by fraudulent documentation, Patricia explained. Allowing you to have your dream wedding here is the least we can do to make amends. The offer meant everything to me, not just financially but symbolically. Having my real wedding at the venue that had been stolen from me felt like the ultimate reclamation of what Camilla and Bryce had tried to destroy. My business, Sentinel Security Solutions, had not only survived their sabotage campaign, but had actually grown stronger as a result of the experience. The FBI investigation had validated my investigative capabilities and professional integrity in ways that no marketing campaign ever could have achieved. Several new clients had specifically sought out my services because they were impressed by how I had handled a sophisticated criminal attack on my own company. You didn't just protect yourself, Harrison Blake from Meridian Financial Group told me during a contract renewal meeting. You helped law enforcement dismantle an entire criminal enterprise that could have victimized dozens of other families and businesses. That level of professional competence and civic responsibility is exactly what we want in our security partners. The media coverage of the case had been extensive, with business journals and security industry publications featuring my role in the investigation as an example of how private security professionals could effectively collaborate with federal law enforcement. I had been invited to speak at 3 industry conferences about threat detection and response, and I was consulting with the FBI on developing better protocols for identifying and investigating romance fraud schemes. But the most meaningful transformation had occurred in my relationship with David and his family. The shock of learning about Camilla's criminal activities and the depth of her malicious intent toward me had forced Jonathan and Priscilla to confront the dysfunctional family dynamics they had enabled for decades. "We failed both of our children," Priscilla admitted during one of the family therapy sessions we had all agreed to attend. "We created a system where Camilla never learned to handle disappointment or competition, and where David learned to sacrifice his own needs to manage her emotions. The consequences of our enabling went far beyond family dysfunction. They contributed to criminal behavior." Jonathan had been particularly devastated by the financial fraud aspects of the case. As a successful businessman who prided himself on making sound financial decisions, the realization that he had been completely deceived by Bryce's investment schemes was a profound blow to his confidence and self-image. "I gave him detailed information about our family's finances," he told the therapist. "Bank account numbers, investment portfolio details, personal identification information that could have been used to destroy us financially. If the FBI hadn't intervened, we could have lost everything." The therapy process had been difficult, but ultimately healing for all of us. David and I learned to communicate more effectively about family boundaries and mutual support. Jonathan and Priscilla began developing healthier relationships with both of their children based on reality rather than denial. And I finally received acknowledgement of the years of mistreatment I had endured from Camilla without any family support. "We should have protected you from Camilla's behavior instead of enabling it," David told me during one particularly emotional session. "You tried to tell us what was happening, and we dismissed your concerns because it was easier than confronting the truth about my sister. Our wedding day was everything I had dreamed it would be when I first toured Rosewood Manor. The September weather was perfect, with golden afternoon light filtering through the rose garden as David and I exchanged vows surrounded by people who genuinely supported our happiness. The guest list was smaller than originally planned. Several family friends had been uncomfortable attending after learning about the criminal investigation, but everyone present was someone who truly celebrated our union. My grandmother Rose, now 78 and still sharp as ever, served as my matron of honor. "I'm proud of how you handled this situation," she told me, as she helped adjust my veil before the ceremony. "You could have chosen revenge or bitterness, but instead you chose justice and healing. That takes real strength and character." David's best man was his law partner Marcus, who had supported us throughout the entire ordeal and had helped coordinate our legal responses to the various aspects of the case. Several of my employees from Sentinel Security served as groomsmen, men and women who had stood by me during the most difficult period of my professional life. Agent Matthews attended as a guest, having become a genuine friend during our months of collaboration. "This is my favorite kind of case outcome," she told me during the reception. "Justice served, criminal enterprise dismantled, and the good guys get their happy ending." As David and I danced our first dance in the ballroom where Camilla had expected to celebrate her fraudulent triumph, I reflected on how much had changed since that devastating phone call from Patricia about the venue theft. I had discovered reserves of strength and determination I didn't know I possessed. I had learned to trust my professional instincts, even when they conflicted with family loyalty. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the most devastating attacks on your life can ultimately lead to the strongest foundations for your future. The wedding venue that had been stolen from me became the scene of justice being served, and now it was the place where David and I were beginning our married life with complete honesty, genuine support from family who had learned to see clearly, and the deep satisfaction that comes from having fought for what mattered most and won. Camilla had tried to teach me my place in the family hierarchy by stealing what I treasured most. Instead, she had taught me that I was stronger, more resourceful, and more deserving of happiness than I had ever realized. Her attempt to destroy my dreams had ultimately led to their fulfillment in ways more meaningful than I could have imagined. As we cut our wedding cake surrounded by the people who truly loved us, I felt grateful for every difficult moment that had brought us to this celebration. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so beautiful and authentic that your enemy's attacks only serve to highlight the contrast between their destructive choices and your constructive ones. The rose garden where federal agents had arrested my former sister-in-law was now filled with the laughter and joy of people celebrating genuine love and hard-won happiness. And that transformation felt like the truest justice of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.